Greetings fellow Mist Wanderers, my name is Steve Morgan and this is DM of the Mists, covering all things Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft. Today's video is all about Warlock patrons in Curse of Strahd and the wider Ravenloft setting in the Domains of Dread. I've listed this more as a Ravenloft video, but I think it'll be good for Curse of Strahd DMs as well, but it will be talking about other potential options outside of Curse of Strahd and other places outside of Barovia. If you are a player or potential player in Curse of Strahd or a wider Ravenloft campaign and you're clicked on this video because you want to research potential options for your patron, there's likely to be a lot of spoilers in this, obviously about some of the Darklords and some of the people you might encounter. So what I'd probably advise is you stop watching now, maybe send this link to your DM can watch it and then they can say whether it's okay for you to watch, whether it's spoiler free or not, depending on what they're running or planning to run. It pains me to say stop watching, but I don't want anyone having their campaigns ruined or what have you. I started my research by clicking on the Patron category on Mistopedia. I love Mistopedia, it's essentially like the Ravenloft wiki. But I think it was kind of more about quest givers, those kinds of patrons, not Warlock patrons, so I kind of had to branch away from that and expand. One of the reasons I wanted to make this video is because one of my PCs is a Warlock, well, technically a multi-class, started off as a Paladin, then took a few levels of Warlock's Hexblade, whose patron is Ebonbane, Darklord of the Shadowlands, who's trying to use this Paladin slash Warlock to secure its exit from Shadowborn Manor, its mini prison. Full confession, I actually used to be pretty rubbish as a DM when it came to, I wouldn't say players' backstories, but when it came to sort of understanding Warlock patron relationship stuff. It's going fairly well now with Ebonbane, but it took a little while to go there. One thing that really helped was the Warlock Patrons video by Genie D. I'm sure many people watching this are familiar with her amazing videos. It kind of helped me to understand the sort of how to make it work in your game, in your campaign, and how the relationship works, and things like that. I'll leave a link in the description. And remember, your choice could be determinant on the type of Warlock subclass. What does the player want to be? Can you make it fit? And I would suggest that you potentially work with the player to choose, because they might have a subclass or want an option that isn't strictly Ravenloft. But, you know, it might be the case that they're happy for you to kind of keep it mysterious and decide for them. This was the case with my player. They didn't tell me who their patron would be. They just said they wanted a sign. And then I figured out a patron and made it fit. And that character's slowly been figuring out who their patron is or could be. And of course, even in a Ravenloft campaign, the patron doesn't have to be in Ravenloft. It could be somewhere else entirely, another plane of existence, the Feywild, the lower planes, the elemental planes. But having a Ravenloft patron in a Ravenloft campaign could make things very interesting. I've got a fairly long list here of ones I'm just going to sort of power through one at a time. I'll give a bit of lore and info about them, what subclasses, what types of Warlock they could fit with, and a few ideas further on. I'll start with a few that are kind of from the wider Ravenloft setting and then do a few from Curse of Strahd later on. Firstly, let's talk about Ebonbane, who I've already mentioned. Ebonbane is the Darklord of the Shadowlands. Or, well, in the older Ravenloft lore, there were 3 Darklords. In the current 5th edition lore, it sounds like there's just one, but the other 2 people who were Darklords are mentioned, so it's, you know, kind of judgment call. Does it still have 3 Darklords, or does it just have 1 Darklord, Ebonbane, but those other 2 Darklords are non-Darklord characters? I read the novel Shadowborn, one of the Ravenloft novels, which gives a great insight into what Ebonbane is like. Ebonbane is actually a demon that was summoned and trapped inside a sword. So you've got 2 options here, Warlock of the Fiend and Warlock of the Hexblade, because Hexblade Warlocks, which is like my Paladin / Warlock, is sentient weapons from the Shadowfell, so Ebonbane was perfect. But it is technically a demon trapped in a sword, so Fiend could work as well. Nepenthe is the name of the sentient sword, again with the sentient swords, of Isolde, the leader of the carnival. And what's quite interesting is when you're flicking through Van Richten's guide, it's very easy to think Isolde, because she's the leader of the carnival, is the Darklord of the carnival, but she's not. The Darklord is actually the sword, Nepenthe. Again, this could work well for a Hexblade Warlock. It could be a very interesting one to have, and then it ties into the carnival, but it could be a very tricky one to incorporate, because Nepenthe is a pretty darn evil sword. I guess most of these options are pretty darn evil. And then, you know, what would Nepenthe want? Would Nepenthe want the person to then fight Isolde? And then you got the complication of, you know, fighting Isolde could make things complicated with the carnival. It's one of those where I think it could work really well if done right, but it could also be really complicated and messy otherwise. Azalin Rex, the famous, or should I say infamous Lich, the ruler / Darklord of Darkon, at least in older lore, in 5th edition lore, it's a bit more complicated. He's currently missing and there's other people trying to take his place. There are two sort of options that work well here that I'll probably repeat quite a few times because there's so many Darklords that fit this. There's Warlock of the Undead and Warlock of the Undying. Two different Warlock subclasses, but they both have those kinds of just basically undead monsters, whether it's liches, vampires, or what have you, work really well as patrons for that. And Azalin's actually name-dropped as a potential example for the Undying subclass, and that's in 5th edition as well, despite his supposed disappearance. If you want more information about Azalin, perhaps the best thing you can read is the second Strahd novel, The War Against Azalin, and you get a real insight into the sort of, I'd say a lot of the time it feels very petty rivalry between Strahd and Azalin and their bickering and their uneasy friendship. They are, in my opinion, two of the best frenemies there ever were. Speaking of Strahd, Strahd could be a patron. And I know I said I was going to talk about Curse of Strahd ones later. Let's talk about Strahd now and then the others later. Strahd could be a really complicated option if you're running Curse of Strahd and he ends up being the patron of one of the PCs. Where I think Strahd could work well is if you're not running Curse of Strahd, you're running a wider Ravenloft campaign that maybe starts in a different domain of dread entirely, and then Strahd and Barovia kind of get roped in later on down the line. You see this in the Ravenloft Mist Hunters modules, which I've not run as is, I kind of borrow from them. For example, when I did my Valachan video, I kind of borrowed the two Valachan ones and ran them pretty closely. But the players don't start in Barovia, but they do visit Barovia and Strahd at one point. Spoiler alert, I guess. So if you were running, say, Mist Hunters, that could be an option. Lord Soth. Again, another option for Undead, Undying, the infamous Death Knight. If you're having Soth be in Ravenloft, I know there's a whole complication of he's technically Dragonlance setting. He did actually end up in Ravenloft for a bit, and there were two novels about him in Ravenloft, and he had his own domain of dread. You know, you could obviously just have Sithicus in 5th edition if you wanted to do. I've been tempted to do it, although technically now it's a part of Claw, where some domains of dread go to die, and I think Sithicus is referenced in that. But he could be a really good option as well. And he's got a past with Strahd as well, similar to Azalin. If you read the first Black Rose novel, Knight of the Black Rose, it's all about how Soth ends up in Barovia and meets Strahd. Kas the Bloody-Handed, the vampire warrior who's Vecna's rival. I actually did a video recently talking about Hiran Tovag as part of my game. That's Kaz's domain of dread. Kas was referenced a lot, but didn't actually appear for reasons I'll talk about in that video. I think he could be a really cool patron, and he's obviously got his own agenda and his own missions and quests he wants to do. Oh, I don't know how to pronounce this. It's the one from har'akir, Darklord of har'akir. It's spelt Ankhtepot, but I think it's pronounced Onkapa. I did actually look at some online, I typed in the name pronunciation into Google and looked at some people trying it, and I think it's Onkapa or maybe Ankhtepot or something like that. Apologies if I'm butchering that. Similar to Azalin, he's an example of another option for the Undying subclass. It actually mentions his name. I have not run har'akir, nor do I plan to, but in my Monsters for Tome Beasts video, I give 15 options of monsters that work well in various domains of dread. But I found loads that were desert themed and could work well for har'akir. It's kind of like a bonus. It's not part of the main 15, it's like a bonus. So if you are considering har'akir, maybe consider looking at that. And in Van Richten's guide, he suggested a Mummy Lord, so Undead, Undying subclass could work well. Zybilna, if you've got a Warlock of the Archfey. This is a very interesting one, because this is, if you read Isolde's backstory in the Carnival, Zybilna is an Archfey who was kind of messing with Isolde, and she left the Feywild to run the Ravenloft Carnival, cast a wish spell to make sure Isolde forgot about her, and is now harassing her carnival by sending evil Fey creatures to attack it. And one thing that's really interesting, if you Google Zybilna, it's supposedly Tasha of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything fame, and one of the three powerful wizards who appear in Vecna Eve of Ruin. Zybilna is supposedly Tasha, but it's like her as an Archfey or her Archfey form. So yeah, that's quite a cool one. If you've got a Warlock of the Fiend and you didn't want to do Ebonbane, who I mentioned earlier, you could consider Khyristrix, if I pronounced that correctly. Khyristrix is a barbed devil that appeared in Expedition to Castle Ravenloft. I think that was 3rd edition. and she has 3 warlocks working underneath her. So she was in Castle Ravenloft and had to deal with Strahd to sort of work there and sort of be a servant to Strahd or whatever, and Strahd wouldn't kill her or whatever. It's worth having a look if that interests you, and you could potentially add them to Castle Ravenloft if you're running Curse of Strahd. Moving on to 2 now, which are a bit unusual because they're kind of religions. So would they have clerics as well as warlocks or instead of warlocks? I don't know. But when I looked into Hala, and I was looking on Mrpedia, I found a name mentioned which was Alistair Smythe, and that was a warlock of Hala. So Hala is a religion, I believe, but has warlocks as well as or instead of clerics. So that could be one option. And then the other option is Ezra. Ezra is the god of the mists. In Van Richten's guide, there's like a little sidebar box thing that talks about Ezra. And funnily enough, my Paladin Warlock PC is a follower of Ezra before the whole thing happened where he started taking Warlock levels and Ebonbane was his patron. And it actually says whether she's a manifestation of the dark powers, an aspect of the Plane of Shadow's mysterious Raven Queen, or something else entirely is for you to decide. So it's the DM's discretion type thing. But yeah, so there could be a few options there, and that strikes me, especially because there's a little bit as well, it says that some people perceive her to be good, some people perceive her to be, and I quote, a soul-stealing embodiment of the mists. So kind of fits well for having clerics, but also having warlocks, I guess, as followers. The Lady of Ravens. This is an interesting one. I think this could be a good one because it kind of made me think of the Raven Queen. Plus you have the Were-Ravens, the Keepers of the Feather in Curse of Strahd and the wider Ravenloft setting. Perhaps if you had a warlock who's tied to them or becomes a Keeper of the Feather, they may point them in the direction of Isle of the Ravens on the Sea of Sorrows, where the Lady of Ravens apparently hangs out. I was going to say hangs out, yeah, just chills, you know, is the Darklord. And that could be an interesting option as well, I think. Right, let's move on to the options in Curse of Strahd. Babala Saga, the infamous witch. She could be an interesting one. The Abbot could be great if you've got a Warlock of the Celestial, because the Abbot is a Celestial in disguise. There could be various Amber Temple vestiges. I've seen some people tie in, if they've got a Warlock who's the Great Old One, tie into one of the Amber Temple vestiges. You could even have a custom one that's escaped. One of the vestiges is broken. Maybe this is the Warlock's patron was entombed in Amber, but escaped somehow. Someone smashed it or what have you. And that's how it's escaped, and that's how it's now become the patron of this Warlock. Exithanta, the Lich there. That one I think could be a bit complicated, because Exithanta, I believe in the write-up for him, is got like sort of memory issues, and his body and his mind are falling apart because his phylactery has not been filled in a long time. So the whole question there of the sort of Warlock patron communication, it might be like no communication or just weird communication, I don't know. Nephren, the Arcanoloth in the Amber Temple, guarding the Amber Temple, is Yugoloth, so that's a Fiend. Potential time for the Warlock of the Fiend. And one thing I'd mention as well, if you do choose if you're running Curse of Strahd and you choose a patron who is in Barovia, don't forget that there's that mention in that section in the alterations to magic section that says Strahd can intercept communications, I think, to deities and patrons. I think it says outside of Barovia, but I think I'd say especially inside Barovia, even more so. So if you have got a Warlock who's trying to talk to their patron, is Strahd listening in on that conversation? On the one hand, that feels a bit sort of harsh and unfair on the Warlock, but at the same time, it also could work really well that Strahd kind of knows this stuff and, you know, could add a layer, an interesting aspect to the campaign that Strahd is eavesdropping and listening in on what's going on. When I was researching this, I came across 2 cool custom Warlock patrons that a Reddit user called Patchwork18 put on the Ravenloft subreddit. One is called Ol Needlemouth, and the other is Zamiu, if that's how that's pronounced. I'll include links in the description. And lastly, let's talk about the dark powers. I've seen various posts on places like the Curse of Strahd subreddit where people they've got a Warlock PC, and they like the idea of the dark powers being that Warlock PC's patron, whether it's the dark powers is a singular entity or multiple. I get the impression it's kind of like multiple entities. You know, it's just one of them or the whole of them collectively. I think it's complicated because I like to see the dark powers as kind of like, I'm sure I read somewhere that they're kind of like above gods, hierarchy-wise. So they're kind of above gods, deities. They're above other patrons. I just think if you've got power from the dark powers directly, that's messy story-wise. You know, you could argue then the Warlock has got like huge power potentially. Is there a complication then of, you know, seeing or meeting them in the future? I don't know. I mean, everyone kind of sees the dark powers differently. I know there's been a lot of discussions about them on various forums, including the Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft subreddit. Don't let me put you off if you are considering the dark powers, but I think it's one that could be a bit complicated. If it were me, I'd probably go for something else and not have it be the dark powers, but that's just me. Let's talk about other things now that we've kind of run through the list tied to Warlocks and Patrons. Let's talk about patron gifts. So, other than obviously their powers and as they level up as a Warlock, you might potentially want to offer your players more, and some very on-brand, on-theme ones for Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft would be dark gifts, whether they're from Van Richten's Guide, Curse of Strahd's Amber Temple. If you're not doing Curse of Strahd, you could still borrow those, or maybe they're given in advance of them going to the Amber Temple, or if they miss or skip the Amber Temple. I've also come across some DM's Guild guides in the past. I'm sure I mentioned them in another video. I think it might be my TBK's video, because I was talking about how people could be revived with a dark gift, and I talked about some cool dark gifts that aren't from Curse of Strahd or Van Richten's Guide. I'll include some links to those in the description if you want to take a look. If you're interested in running some cool patron monsters, I know of at least two, one from a official 5th edition source and then one from like a third-party source. You've got Deathlocks from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, updated in Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse, who are warlocks who have sort of failed their patron or have broken their pact or what have you, and so they've been transformed into these undead warlocks, which is pretty cool. And Fexts, these are from Tome of Beasts. I did a video about Tome of Beast monsters, and I think they were one of them that work well in Ravenloft. They look so cool. I love their art. And they're the opposite of Deathlocks. They are ones who are so wholly devoted to their patron that their patron is like turned them into a Fext, and then they're kind of enforcers, bodyguards, and assassins, the text says. So I wouldn't necessarily know how you could fit those in if you've just got a warlock. Maybe like a warning to a warlock. If a warlock is misbehaving, send some Deathlocks or some Fexts to, you know, cause some hassle and cause them some grief, and for the patron try and snap them back in line perhaps. And this is a really important point I want to address. It's all well and good for me to say, yeah, make your warlock patron somebody who then your PCs might then meet in the future, and in my case, with it being Ebonbane, they're going to go to the Shadowlands. They may then fight Ebonbane. They may then defeat Ebonbane. I can understand if my PC's then worried, you know, I can't fight my patron, I might lose all my powers. So how would you handle that? I guess in my case, I'm not sure if this will work for everyone, but in my case, my plan is that Ezra is going to appear and offer to be my paladin / warlock's replacement patron. So he doesn't lose his powers. I'm even going to give him the option then to swap to, say, Warlock of the Celestial, and he's got a sword to do with his, you know, quest. So he's got a Vorpal sword at the moment. She's going to offer if he wants to change it to a Holy Avenger, but I'm going to leave that up to the PC. The PC might want to stick with Hexblade, might want to stick with the Vorpal sword, or might want to change to one or the other or both. I thought it would be a cool way to handle it, and that way there's no worry then if they do have to fight and defeat Ebonbane, then there's no risk then of the player losing their powers or what have you. If this comes up in your game, you might want to consider something similar. Perhaps another Darklord approaches the player, you know, I say approaches the player in terms of like in their head, in their dreams or whatever, and says, I'll be your new patron now. And that's it for this one. Who else have I missed? I appreciate as well I've not covered every warlock type or subclass, such as Genie Fathomless. They were really difficult in terms of thinking how to do them. I don't even know if there's a Genie Darklord. Fathomless is to do with elemental planes. I did actually have a Mareed appear in my Folkovnia campaign when my PCs were in Folkovnia very briefly. I don't think I even talk about it in my Folkovnia video because it was so weird and out there, but I kind of needed it for story reasons. So, you know, that could have been an option, I guess, that fit both Genie and Fathomless. But then trying to add a Genie to Ravenloft, I'm sure there's an Afriti somewhere in the Domains of Dread, or one of the other Genie types, or maybe one that's like a Darklord, or you can homebrew something and create your own Darklord that's an Afriti, or a Mareed or whatever. That could be really cool. But if I've missed anyone, or you have any ideas, whether you approach it from the angle of I've missed this important NPC / Darklord, or slash deity slash whatever from the Domains of Dread, or here's an idea for this Warlock subclass, please leave a comment. I'd be really interested to know, and it's going to be really handy for other people who've ended upon this video and maybe I've not filled that blank, and you might with your comment. Upcoming videos, I think the next Curse of Strahd video, so the next video after this one, is going to be my alternative fated allies for Curse of Strahd. Some of them are Ravenloft famous people, for instance Jan the Sunstar, so even if you're not running Curse of Strahd, you might be interested to see who the options are. I think the next Ravenloft video is likely to be factions of Ravenloft, so in the Sword Coast Forgotten Realms, you've got things like the Lord's Alliance, Emerald Enclave, things like that. You've got in Ravenloft, you've got the Keepers of the Feather, the Circle, and more. So I'll talk a few options in that. Thank you, Mist Wanderers.